Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to look at how three literary giants held up a mirror to the Victorian era. Now, this was a seriously fascinating and contradictory time, and these authors used their art to challenge the very foundations of their society.
I mean, think about it. How do you challenge an entire society? That was the big question for writers in Victorian England. This was an age of, incredible confidence, industrial might, imperial power, but it was also an age with some serious problems just simmering right beneath the surface.
Okay, so on the surface, you had this ideal of progress, industry, and a really strict, almost suffocating sense of morality. But, and this is a big but, beneath that shiny exterior was a totally different reality. We're talking shocking poverty, social repression, and just staggering hypocrisy that, let's be honest, a lot of people were happy to just ignore. So yeah, how do you make people see something they're actively trying not to see? Well, three literary rebels found a way. Let's dive into the three very different strategies they used to critique their world. And we'll start with the most direct, in-your-face approach. All right, first up, we've got the literary heavyweight himself, Charles Dickens. And this guy did not pull any punches. His strategy? He confronted society's problems head-on, making this really direct and powerful moral appeal right to the conscience of his readers. And this quote from his novella, The Chimes, man, this is the absolute core of his argument. He was directly attacking that popular Victorian idea of victim blaming. You know, that convenient story that said poverty was the fault of the poor themselves, that they were just lazy or immoral. Dickens was like, nope, absolutely not, and argued the exact opposite. And he built his case so cleverly, really, in three clear steps. First, he showed how poverty wasn't just about not having enough food, it was a spiritual thing, this corrosive despair that just eats away at your belief in your own dignity. Then he tore apart that absurd narrative of blame. And finally, he championed hope, arguing it's a fundamental human necessity. So here's the bottom line. Dickens was aiming right for his readers' hearts. He wanted to make them feel the injustice, you know? He basically argued that society is this interconnected whole, and when one part of it is suffering, it ultimately affects everyone. It was this powerful call for social responsibility, not just, dropping a coin in a bucket. But here's the thing, not every writer could be as direct as Dickens. In an era with such strict social codes and the threat of censorship, speaking out was risky. And that was especially true for a woman who was challenging ideas about gender and family. So this leads us to our second, much more sneaky strategy. What do you do when you can't speak plainly? You learn to speak in code. And that brings us to Elizabeth Gaskell. Wow, she was an absolute master of disguise. She very cleverly used the super popular ghost story genre as a kind of Trojan horse for her sharp social critique. She basically hid her message in plain sight, right inside the shadows of a haunted house. Gaskell was a leading writer in a tradition known as the female Gothic. And this was so much more than just spooky stories. Think of it as a kind of coded language. It gave women writers a way to explore themes they couldn't touch otherwise. Things like patriarchal oppression, anxieties about the home, female confinement, all the stuff that was totally off limits in mainstream fiction. The real genius of her strategy was to completely shift the location of terror. So the scary stuff was no longer happening in some distant, creepy castle on a remote, windswept moor. Nope, the greatest horrors were found right inside the supposedly safe, sacred space of the Victorian family home. And by doing that, she made the horror deeply psychological. She was suggesting that the real monsters aren't hiding under the bed. They're the unacknowledged secrets and sins festering inside these quote-unquote respectable families.
So in her stories, the haunted house itself becomes this incredibly powerful symbol. It's like the physical embodiment of all the stuff the family tries to bury, all their secrets, their traumas, their hypocrisies. The ghosts? They're literally the past coming back to haunt them, forcing the family to finally confront the abuses and privileges they've tried so hard to forget.
Okay, so our final author, he didn't just want to critique Victorian society. Oh no, he wanted to reject its core values entirely. And so, enter the flamboyant, the witty, the utterly rebellious Oscar Wilde.
All art is quite useless. I mean, just let that sink in. This is one of Wilde's most famous, most provocative statements. You have to remember, this was an era that demanded art have a moral purpose. It had to be useful, it had to teach you something. And then Wilde just comes along and throws down the gauntlet with this. It was a direct, completely unapologetic challenge to the entire Victorian worldview.
So you had this massive clash of ideas. The typical Victorian view was that art should be moral and useful. But Wilde championed this philosophy called aestheticism, which is famously summed up as art for art's sake. He argued that art doesn't need to justify its existence by teaching a lesson or serving some social function. Its only job is to be beautiful. It just needs to be. I mean, in an age obsessed with utility and morality, this was a genuinely radical idea. It basically freed art from the chains of Victorian moralism.
So how did he fight this battle? Simple. He weaponized wit. His plays, especially The Importance of Being Earnest, are just packed with these brilliant, contradictory one-liners. And his whole strategy was to flip everything on its head. He'd treat totally trivial things, like a person's name, with absurd seriousness, and then treat really serious things, like marriage, as if they were just some silly game. And by doing that, he just perfectly exposed the hypocrisy and the sheer superficiality of the upper class, showing how they cared way more about style than sincerity.
So there you have it. 3 incredible writers, 3 totally different strategies, all aimed at challenging their era. We had Dickens with his direct moral appeal, Gaskell with her coded, creepy critique, and Wilde with his full-on rebellious satire.
It really breaks down like this. You've got Dickens using emotional realism to attack social indifference. You've got Gaskell using Gothic symbolism to expose the repression happening inside the home. And then you've got Wilde using his razor-sharp wit to just dismantle upper-class hypocrisy. So yeah, their literary weapons were totally different, but they were all aiming at the exact same target, the rigid, hypocritical conventions of Victorian society.
And that's really the power of it, isn't it? Each of them, in their own unique way, proved just how powerful literature can be. They weren't just telling fun stories. They were holding a mirror up to their entire world, forcing it to look at all the ugly, uncomfortable truths it was trying so hard to ignore. They provoked, they challenged, and you know what? They inspired change. Which, leaves us with a final, pretty provocative thought. The specific issues might change over time, but those tools of critique, empathy, symbolism, wit, they're absolutely timeless. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? If Dickens, Gaskell, and Wilde were alive and writing today, what parts of our society would they be holding a mirror up to? What modern hypocrisies would they be taking aim at?